Alina woke that morning with sunlight spilling through the curtains, brushing her face with warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The air in her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the life she had built around herself. She stretched thinking about the past calls from her mother and father. Their demands, their excuses, their expectations. They had walked away from her, leaving her in the system, leaving her to survive. Leaving her to wonder if anyone would ever see her worth. And now, for the first time, she realized that walking away had been their loss, not hers. She had survived and she had grown strong. That morning, she had a routine to follow. Coffee, emails, and then a walk through the park to clear her mind. As she left the apartment, she noticed something familiar, yet startling, a figure standing at the corner of the street. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Caleb, the boy she had grown up with in the foster system. The one who had never abandoned her was here again, waiting. Alina, he said softly, smile tugging at the corners of his lips. His voice had a steadiness that made her chest ache, not from pain, but from recognition. He had changed, matured, but the essence of him, the kindness, the unwavering loyalty remained. They walked together without speaking at first, letting the quiet between them fill with the sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the chatter of people passing by. The silence felt safe. She had not realized how much she missed someone who simply stood with her, who did not ask for favors, who did not remind her of abandonment. Finally, Caleb spoke. "I've thought about finding you for years," he said. "I never stopped hoping we'd meet again." Lena looked at him, her chest tightening. "Why now?" she asked. "After all this time?" He shrugged, a simple movement that seemed to carry the weight of countless nights sleeping in cold shelters, working odd jobs, and surviving on hope alone. "Because before anyone walked away, you stayed. You stayed with me when it mattered most." His words struck her with a force she wasn't expecting. For so long she had measured worth by who chose her, who loved her, who remembered her. And now here was someone whose choice was pure, whose loyalty was unwavering. She realized for the first time in years that not all connections were fleeting. Some could be steadfast, deep, and healing. They spent the day walking through the park, talking about their lives, their struggles, and the years that had separated them. Caleb told her about his time in the system after they left each other, the jobs he had taken, the streets he had slept on. He spoke with honesty, without exaggeration or dramatization. And Alina found herself nodding along, recognizing the truth of survival in his words. "I always wondered if you made it," he admitted. "If you were okay." "I survived," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I had to. I didn't have a choice." "But now you do," Caleb said gently. "Now you can choose who stays, who goes, and who matters." Elena's eyes lingered on him. Those words echoed in her mind. She had spent years reacting to her parents' choices, obeying unspoken rules, and surviving. Now she could finally act for herself. She could decide without guilt, without fear, without old wounds dictating her life. Days passed and Caleb remained a constant presence in her life. They met for coffee, walked in the park, and sometimes sat in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. With him, Alina began to feel emotions she had long suppressed: trust, comfort, and even the beginnings of attraction. She realized that intimacy didn't always have to come with pain. Some closeness could be gentle, tender, and safe. One evening, they sat on her small balcony, the city lights sparkling below them. Caleb leaned back, eyes reflecting the night. "Alina," he said, "you're not the child they left behind anymore. You've built something real, something strong, something yours." She smiled faintly, feeling tears rise but refusing to let them fall. "It hasn't been easy," she said. "Every step has been hard. Every choice has been a test." "But you've passed," he said softly, "and now you get to live." The words sank in. Alina realized that she had been surviving for years, but living, truly living, was something else. Living meant making choices that honored herself. Living meant embracing people who cared without fear or hesitation. Living meant stepping into the possibility of love, connection, and safety, Her parents' voices no longer haunted her. Their calls demanding favors, their attempts at guilt, their reminders of past abandonment. They were powerless now. She had learned to protect herself, to stand firm, to say no. And saying no had given her the freedom to say yes to the right things, to friendship, to trust, to healing. One night, as they walked through the city streets after dinner, Caleb paused, turning to face her. "Alina," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I'm here. Not because I need something from you, not because anyone told me to be, but because I choose to be. You deserve people who stay, who care, who see you. And I see you." Alina felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years unseen, overlooked, forgotten. And now here was someone offering recognition, loyalty, and connection without condition. She realized that she had been waiting for this all her life, not from her parents, but from someone who truly understood her. Her heart, once guarded and cautious, began to open. She allowed herself to lean closer to Caleb, feeling the warmth of trust and shared history. It wasn't a rush of passion. It was a gentle unfolding of something deeper. Something rooted in understanding and safety. As the weeks passed, their bond grew. They shared meals, memories, laughter, and sometimes tears. Caleb reminded Alina of her strength, of the girl who had survived foster homes, state care, and abandonment. He helped her see that the woman she had become was worthy of care, respect, and love. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves sitting in a quiet cafe, watching raindrops race down the window. Caleb reached out and took her hand in his. "Alina," he said, "I want you to know something. You don't owe them anything. Not your parents, not your sister, not your brother. You owe yourself everything, and I want to be part of that life if you'll let me." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't fight. She squeezed his hand, realizing that she had finally found someone who could be steady, gentle, and present. She didn't need to fear being abandoned again. She didn't need to hide her feelings. For the first time, she could embrace connection fully. Knowing that she had the power to protect herself, Elena's parents attempted, one last time, to pull her back into their orbit. Her mother called, pleading, "Alina, please, Mila really needs you. She has nowhere else to go." Her father sent another text about Jonas, asking for financial help, but Alina remained firm. She didn't respond. She had learned that her no was a shield, a boundary, and a declaration of self-respect. And as she sat with Caleb that evening, watching the city lights flicker, she understood something profound. The people who abandoned her had no power over her now. She was no longer the child they had left behind. She was a woman who had survived, who had grown, and who had the freedom to choose. Caleb smiled at her, a quiet, knowing smile. "You've done something incredible," he said. "You've taken all the pieces of a life they tried to break and made something beautiful. Something yours." Alina nodded, feeling the weight of those words. For years she had measured herself by their absence, by their choices, by what they did not give her. Now she measured herself by her own resilience, her own courage, and her own ability to embrace life fully. The past no longer dictated her. She had learned to say no. She had learned to protect herself. And she had learned to say yes to the right people, to the right opportunities, and to the possibility of love and connection. One evening, as the city slept beneath them, Caleb took her hand and said softly, "Alina, you are not just surviving anymore. You are living. And I want to be here by your side, witnessing it." Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief, joy, and a quiet hope she hadn't allowed herself in years. She realized that her story was no longer defined by abandonment, neglect, or being the child no one chose. Her story was now hers. "I choose this," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I choose myself, and I choose this." Caleb nodded, a gentle smile on his face. They stood together on the balcony, the night air wrapping around them. The city lights shimmered below like 1,000 small promises. And for the first time in her life, Alina felt truly seen, truly safe, and truly alive. The chapter of abandonment had closed. The chapter of survival had ended. And the chapter of choice, love, and healing had begun. Alina was no longer the child left behind. She was the woman who chose herself first. She was the woman who could say no. She was the woman who could finally say yes. And in that quiet, perfect moment, she realized that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with someone who saw her, valued her, and stayed. With someone who helped her believe that life could be gentle, beautiful, and full of hope. And she knew, without a doubt, that she had finally come home to herself. The day her mother called, Alina felt a strange mix of hesitation and old ache. She hadn't imagined ever hearing her voice again. It wasn't a casual hello. It was a summons. Something she had spent years trying not to feel: guilt, obligation, the pull of being needed. Her mother had always been clever like that, knowing exactly which buttons to press. But Alina had grown. She knew how those buttons worked. She just hadn't realized how tempting they could feel. "Sweetheart, it's been too long." Her mother said on the phone, her voice soft but urgent. The word sweetheart pricked Elena's chest. She had spent so many years without it, and now it was being thrown at her, like a lure. But Alina didn't answer immediately. She let the line hum. She let herself feel the hollow silence in her own apartment. It was quiet there, but not comforting, quiet, just space to think. Space she hadn't had as a child. "I need a favor," her mother said after a pause. Elena's stomach twisted. Of course. It wasn't a call to ask how she had been or if she was happy. It was a call to ask for something. "It's Mila," her mother said. "She's going through a divorce and needs a place to stay for a few weeks. I thought, since you live alone." Maybe Elena's reply was immediate. A clear, steady no. She hadn't allowed herself to speak with such certainty to her mother in years. She could hear the surprise in the other line. Can't or won't. Her mother snapped. Alina hung up without another word. Her hands shook, but not from fear. Something in her chest had finally hardened. It wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity. She realized she didn't owe anyone. Not her mother, who had left her behind. Not her sister, who had lived the golden life. Not her father, who had chosen Jonas over her. She had spent too long trying to fit into a story where she had no role. Now she had written herself a new one. No one knocked at her door that night. No one called. There was only silence. And Alina let herself sink into it. It wasn't lonely. It was familiar. The quiet had been her companion for over a decade. But this time, it was empowering. An hour later, her phone rang again. Her father. She hesitated but answered. "Elena," he said, trying to sound warm. "Kiddo, it's been a long time." "Kiddo?" The word made her chest tighten. It had always been the word he used when he wanted to make her feel smaller. When he wanted to pretend he cared. "I heard you upset your mother," he continued. "Jonas needs help. He's applying to a program, but there's a fee. You work now, right? Maybe you could help." Elena's voice was calm but firm. "No," her father froze. "You're being selfish. Your brother needs you." Selfish. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Alina thought about all the years she had been left to survive without help, without guidance, without anyone choosing her. And now that she could say no, it felt like an act of rebellion. Not cruelty rebellion, survival. The line went quiet. She hung up and sat on her small balcony, staring at the city lights. She had grown up in their absence, survived the system, and built her own life. And for the first time, she realized something. She wasn't powerless anymore. Saying no didn't make her cruel. It made her strong. That night, Alina drifted into sleep feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. She had protected herself from the people who had once left her behind. But deep down, she knew the past wasn't finished with her yet. The next morning, she walked to her favorite cafe. She'd like to start her day there with a cup of black coffee and the morning sun hitting the tables. That day, something unusual happened. A familiar voice called her name, Alina. She froze mid-step. It was a voice she hadn't expected to hear in years. She turned and saw Caleb, the boy she had grown up with in foster care. Her closest friend. The one who had stayed by her side when everything else had abandoned her. He looked older now, taller, broader. His eyes carried the same kindness, but also something heavier experiences. Struggles. The shadows of a life lived in hard places. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. Alina blinked. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't imagined seeing him again. Not here, not now. She felt an old, familiar warmth and fear rise in her chest. They walked together to a nearby park. Words tumbled out, hurried, messy. They shared stories of the years apart. Caleb had aged out of the system too. Worked odd jobs, slept on friends' couches. He had survived. And Alina realized how much they had both changed. Yet how deeply they were still connected. "I always hoped you'd made it," Caleb said. His voice quiet but steady. "I tried," Alina replied, shrugging. "Trying not to let the old pain show?" "You did more than try," he said. For the first time, Alina allowed herself to feel seen, not by her parents. Not by anyone who had abandoned her, but by someone who knew exactly what she had endured. They sat on a park bench, sunlight cutting through the branches above. Alina felt the years of neglect and abandonment press down on her. She thought of Mila, living her life with their mother, golden and untouchable. She thought of Jonas, living comfortably with their father. And she thought of herself scraping through years of uncertainty and loneliness, building a life that was hers alone. Caleb reached out and touched her hand, briefly, as if to remind her that connection still existed in the world. She felt a shock of recognition, a sense of home she hadn't felt in years. It didn't erase the past, but it softened the edges of her pain. "Alina," he said, looking into her eyes, "do you ever wonder why they left you behind?" She nodded, though the tears threatened to rise. "All the time. But I've stopped asking. It doesn't change anything." He nodded, understanding. "You don't owe them anything." And for the first time in years, Alina felt the truth of that statement deep in her chest. She didn't owe anyone. Not her mother, who only called when she needed something. Not her father, who treated her like a last resort. Not even her sister or brother, who had been chosen over her. She owed herself days past. Alina began to reconnect with Caleb. They shared coffee, walks, and long conversations that stretched into the night. He reminded her of the girl she had been, the one who had been brave enough to survive everything alone. And slowly she began to feel strength returning. The kind that wasn't born from fear, but from choice. Her mother called again, more desperate this time. "Elena, please, Mila really needs you." "She has nowhere else to go." Alina ignored it. She realized that being chosen for someone else's convenience was never a gift. It was a trap. She wasn't going to step into it. She didn't have to. Her father followed suit, sending texts, emails, and voicemails, all asking for help, all demanding a piece of her that she didn't owe them. One evening, for a long day at work, Alina sat on her balcony again. Caleb joined her. They didn't need words at first. Just sitting together, sharing space, sharing quiet, felt enough. "You're stronger than they ever imagined," he said softly. Alina felt a lump in her throat. "I had to be," she whispered. "I had no choice." "But now you do," he said. "You get to choose." Those words struck her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She realized that for years she had been living under their rules, letting their absence and their demands shape her life. But she didn't have to anymore. She could say yes or no. She could protect herself. She could decide who mattered and who didn't. In the weeks that followed, Alina maintained her distance from her parents. They called less frequently when they realized she wouldn't respond to guilt or obligation. She kept her boundaries firm. And with Caleb, she found a connection that wasn't built on fear or abandonment, but on understanding and choice. One afternoon, while walking through the park, Caleb turned to her. "You've done something amazing," he said. "You've taken all the pieces of a life they tried to break and built something real. Something yours." Alina smiled faintly. "It's not perfect," she said. "No life is," Caleb replied. "But this one is yours. And that's what matters." That night, Alina sat alone in her apartment and reflected. She thought of all the children in the system who had no one, who didn't find someone like Caleb to remind them of their worth. She thought of her own survival, her own hard-earned independence. And she felt a quiet pride she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The calls, the demands, the guilt they no longer had power over her. She realized that life wasn't about fixing the people who abandoned you. It was about protecting yourself. It was about saying no when no was necessary. And most importantly, it was about saying yes to the people who truly saw you, who valued you, who stayed. And just as she accepted this truth, a new possibility appeared, a hint of something unexpected, something tender, something that could change the story she had written for herself. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Caleb took her hand again, this time not as a reminder of the past, but as a bridge to the future. And Alina realized that for the first time, she was not just surviving. She was beginning to live. The past had walked away from her. She had survived. And now, for the first time, she was choosing who she allowed in her life, who she trusted, who she cared for. The chapter of abandonment was closing, and the chapter of choice, real, deliberate, beautiful choice, was beginning. The memory always returned to Alina in sharp flashes: the sound of a door slamming, the shaky breath of a child hiding behind a wall, and the echo of two adults breaking the last pieces of a home. She used to think families cracked slowly, like small lines forming on glass. But hers didn't crack. It shattered in one loud, frightening afternoon when she was 12 years old, that day. The sky outside was gray and heavy with the promise of rain. But inside the house, the storm was already happening. Alina had been sitting on the carpet with a book when her mother's voice cut through the air, sharp, angry, shaking with frustration. Her father shouted back, and the sound hit Alina like thrown stones. She stood in the hallway, unsure whether to move or stay frozen. Her mother marched from room to room, pulling drawers open and stuffing clothes into bags. Her father followed her, arguing, pointing, raising his voice. Their words tangled in the air. Alina couldn't understand everything, but she understood enough. This time was different. This was the kind of fight that had an ending. Mila, her older sister by 3 years, stood near the kitchen door with her arms crossed. Jonas, 2 years younger than Alina, hid halfway behind the couch with wide, scared eyes. The three of them exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. They were used to the fights. They were used to silence. They were used to hoping everything would go back to normal in a few hours. But nothing about that day felt normal. Her mother zipped one suitcase so violently that the metal teeth scraped. Then she turned and grabbed Mila's arm. "Let's go," she snapped. Mila didn't protest. She moved as if she already knew her role in the story. Their mother had always favored her, always called her the responsible one, always praised her for things that seemed so small. Alina watched her sister walk toward the front door without even glancing back. Her father stepped between them before they reached the exit. "You're not taking both kids?" he hissed. Her mother's eyes narrowed. "I'm not leaving her with you." Her father laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think I'm letting you take Jonas?" "No, he's staying with me." He pulled Jonas forward, his hand gripping the boy's small shoulder. Jonas stumbled, confused, but he didn't pull away. He looked too scared to choose anything. Alina stepped back, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her parents weren't just fighting. They were dividing them. Her brother going one way, her sister going another. And her she didn't know. Her voice finally broke free from her throat. "Where do I go?" The room fell silent for a moment. Her mother didn't turn. Her father didn't look at her. It wasn't anger. It was something worse: indifference. They kept arguing about each other, about lawyers, about who deserved what. But no one answered her question. Her question hung in the air like a paper lantern no one reached for. Milan left with their mother. Jonas stayed with their father. And no one reached for Elena's hand. No one called her name. No one said, "Come with me." She stood there, 12 years old, with her backpack slung over one shoulder and her fingers digging into the strap like it might hold her together. The next morning, strangers came. Social workers. They spoke softly, too softly, as if softness fixed anything. They asked her to pack some clothes. They smiled in that professional way that didn't reach their eyes. Alina packed her life in 30 minutes. Her father didn't help. Her mother wasn't there. Mila and Jonas were gone. She sat in the back of a state car, hugging her backpack, watching her house shrink behind her as the car pulled away. She tried not to cry. She had learned long ago that crying only made you feel worse when nobody hugged you. Afterward, the foster homes blurred together over the years. Places with new rules, new faces, new fears. Some foster parents were kind, others cold, but none stayed long enough to feel like family. Rooms with white walls, shared beds, broken toys, schools where she was always the new girl. People asking questions she didn't want to answer. She learned to fold herself small, to speak only when needed, to hide her sadness in humor, to listen more than she talked, to make herself forget the sound of her parents' voices. Birthdays passed quietly. Sometimes a foster home bought her a cupcake. Sometimes no one remembered. On her 13th birthday, she made a wish that someone would show up for her. Not a new family, not a perfect life, just someone who chose her, but wishes were for kids. And Alina grew up fast. At 14, she stopped hoping her mother would call. At 15, she learned how to smooth her hair with water when she didn't have conditioner. At 16, she learned the bus routes by memory so she could stop being late to school. At 17, she understood the system well enough to know what happened to kids who didn't keep their grades up or fell in with the wrong people. At 18, the state handed her a folder of documents, a bus card, and a good luck. It wasn't much, but it was more than her parents ever gave. She rented a tiny room, barely more than a closet, but it was hers. She worked part-time in a cafe and later full-time in an office doing entry-level tasks. Nothing glamorous, but it paid for food and a mattress and a single window that let in sunlight when she woke up. She learned to breathe again, slowly, carefully, in small steps. She finally allowed herself to believe she could build a life not defined by abandonment. She had a studio apartment with peeling paint but warm lights. She had coworkers who smiled at her. She had days without fear. She even had a plant she managed not to kill. Most importantly, she had silence that didn't hurt. But peace was a fragile thing. And hers ended the day her phone rang with a number she hadn't seen in over a decade. It happened on a quiet Monday evening. Alina had just come home from work, her feet sore, her hair tied messily on top of her head. She set down her bag, stretched her neck, and reached for her phone as the screen lit up. The caller ID made her freeze. Mom taught her thumb hovered above the accept button. She hadn't seen that name in years. Before she could decide, her body acted on instinct. She answered, Alina. Her mother said, her voice too cheerful, too smooth, like she had practiced it in the mirror. Sweetheart, is that you? Sweetheart? A word Alina hadn't heard from her mother since she was a child, tugging at her sleeve. Begging for her attention. Yes, Alina said, her voice flat. Oh, honey, it's been so long. We all miss you. Alina felt something twist inside her chest. There had been no we when she needed someone. There had been no mother comforting her through sleepless nights, no sister writing letters, no father calling to ask if she was safe. What do you want? Alina asked plainly. Her mother sighed dramatically, like she always did when she wanted sympathy. It's about Mila, she began. Of course it was. The golden child. The favorite. The daughter who grew up with her mother's approval while Alina ate bland dinners in foster homes. She's going through a divorce, her mother continued, and she needs a place to stay. Just for a few weeks. Since you live alone, maybe? No, Alina said immediately. Her mother fell silent. Then her tone sharpened, losing the fake softness. Can't or won't. Alina didn't want to explain her. No. She didn't want to open old wounds or hear excuses for choices her mother made years ago. So she hung up. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From something like anger and strength mixed together. 20 minutes later, her phone rang again. This time it was her father. She stared at the screen for a long moment before picking up. Alina, he said, trying to sound warm. Kiddo, it's been a long time, kiddo. The name he used when he wanted her to feel small. When he wanted to pretend he hadn't left her behind, he didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask if she was happy or safe. He jumped straight to the point. I heard you upset your mother, he said. Listen, Jonas needs help. He's applying for a program, but he needs some money for the fee. Not a lot. You work now, right? Maybe you could know, she said again. Her father sounded stunned. Alina, don't be selfish. Your brother needs you. Selfish. The word hit her harder than it should have. She had spent her whole life watching others get chosen, watching others get loved, watching others get saved. And now saying no made her selfish. Alina, he added, you can't hold grudges forever. She didn't reply. She simply ended the call. And then she sat on her small balcony, staring at the city lights blinking like tired stars. She felt a burn in her eyes, not sadness, not longing. Something new, strength, control, boundaries. For years she'd been the child no one chose, the one pushed aside, the one they left for strangers to care for. But now she had something none of them expected, a life built without them, a foundation they could no longer break. She leaned back in her chair, letting the night air cool her skin. She thought about the people who wanted things from her now, people who never wanted her before. Her mother wanted space for Mila, her father wanted money for Jonas, and both wanted Alina to act like the lost years didn't matter. But she remembered those years well. Every lonely night, every whispered wish, every moment she held herself together because no one else would. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was simply done begging, done shrinking, done trying to earn what should have been hers in the first place. That night, Alina whispered her first real truth out loud. They didn't choose me, but I choose myself. She didn't know her past wasn't finished with her yet. She didn't know another person, someone from the same fractured system, was already walking back into her life. Not to take from her, not to use her,